Hi, everybody. Rada here with the next episode of Book Banter. Tonight, I am super excited to talk with Emily Robinson. She is a writer, actor, director, and we are going to talk about her debut novel. Her debut novel is Consumed. It is part sort of thriller, part love story. I was kind of enthralled by the whole story, and I can't wait to hear her process and how we got here from writing, acting, and into this novel. So, without further ado, I'm going to welcome Emily onto the screen. Here we go. Hi, Emily.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here.
Yay! I am so glad that you could join me for Book Banter. We already have a huge Emily Robinson fan commenting, so that's all it says. Huge fan, which of course, obviously. I do want to ask you, give us the elevator pitch, if you will, for your book. What is your book about?
Yeah, so I think, Consumed, at its core, the themes that it sort of is exploring is how trauma stays in the body. So that is sort of like the thematic thing overlaying the story. But what it's actually about is this girl who dealt with like a violation from a very close friend, like a sexual violation. And she flees her hometown of New York to kind of get some space. And in the process, her body sort of starts to break down. But she also finds love and basically works on this vineyard in Italy and sort of is contending with finding love and moving on and trying to be able to process something, but before she can really allow her body to fully hold the space that she needs in order to metabolize the trauma. And so it's kind of experimental and rabid and fun and delicious and disgusting and all of the things. I definitely had nightmares, right? This is not my it felt like very much something I needed to write, not something that I ever thought I would write. But I think it should be a fun read.
That's fun. Well, and so you were drawn to write this more than this is what I'm going to do today.
Yeah, what happened was, so the locations in the book are very close to me. So I grew up in New York, and so that was very familiar. I went to college in the city, and I wrote this. I started writing it the summer after my sophomore year of college, which was it was just a very tumultuous time in my life, as it is for many. And I was processing a lot of things. I was figuring things out, and I went to Italy and I worked on a vineyard. None of the rest obviously happened, but what happened was they had really bad access to Wi-Fi, and sometimes they would lock us in. They would forget that they had locked the door and we didn't have keys, so we couldn't get out, and they would limit our Wi-Fi use. And anyway, I ran out of books to read, and I had nothing to do, and had been reading a lot of queer poetry, and somehow wrote a version of this, and then basically was that doesn't work. And then over the next year and a half, 2 years, through my program at Columbia, workshopped this and sort of found the book that it eventually would become.
Okay, that is the best. I have never heard that story as to why I wrote a book, because I was literally locked in a vineyard and I read everything that they had available. And then I was I guess I'll write my own book.
Yeah, I mean, fellowships really need to get on this method. It works.
Just lock them in a room with some wine.
Totally fine. I mean, we didn't even really have that much wine. It was,
because you're working. You can't drink all the products.
Exactly. But
I love
that.
No,
I mean, it was a great experience. Yeah.
So, okay, for taking that further, and then you said you workshopped it in your when you were at Columbia.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So then were you later what am I gonna write? Oh, I've got that thing. Or were you continuing to work on it through from
basically
that?
What happened was I wrote a screenplay version of it that didn't work because it's a very internal story, so to speak. It's a very intimate first person, and that's kind of how I think the plot works well, how it functions. And so basically, once I realized the script made no sense, the plot was pretty much the same. And then I was maybe this is a book. And luckily I was in a creative writing program where we write mostly prose, and had some really special professors. Because like in the initial, there's sort of a disease in it called rumination. I had no idea that existed, but my professor, Hilary Leichter, who was amazing and a wonderful writer, obviously, she had watched Diagnosis on Netflix, and that sort of worked its way into it. And then I had another professor, Sam Lipsyte, who I did an independent study with as well as a workshop, and he kind of like pushed the horror a bit further, which was tough for me personally, but I think very much like what the book needed. So I think it's a very it's a book that I knew I needed to write, but I don't know that I would have signed up for all of the things if I knew what it would entail before embarking on it, which I think is how every sort of creative endeavor really functions. And luckily I had the mentors I needed to really like see it through.
Well, and kudos to pushing the horror element. I'm not a huge horror fan, but at the same time, that kind of makes it when you push that envelope, no matter which direction you're going, you come upon something and you're like, maybe people won't really like that, or maybe I don't need to. That's making me a little bit uncomfortable, so maybe I shouldn't. And then you do push past it. That is, to me, I love it when people take those risks. And I would say it pays off. In the books that I've read, it pays off like 90%.
Yeah. And I think it's like a lot of modern horror kind of does use it for a purpose. It's like, metaphorical horror, which this certainly is. And I think that's something that I can wrap my head around much more easily. But still, when you're writing it and having to look up things, I was like, oh God, the government is going to put me on some list. Like I was texting my like doctor cousin. I was like, oh, what does this do? Or how do you, terrifying things. But
what happens if you do this? And they're like, why do you want to know?
Why do you do this up? I'm like, I swear.
I'm just writing a book. It's fine. I'm fine. Okay, so we have a question. Linda is asking, who influenced you? So let's talk about your writing. So is there anybody who's influenced your writing?
Yeah, definitely. So many people. I mean, it's hard because it's like ever since I was little, like my dream was always to be a writer. And so like I want to say the first book that really influenced me was What Makes a Rainbow. So I memorized that to prove to my parents that I learned how to read before I learned how to read. But no, I think ridiculous. But I think in recent memory, like Melissa Broder is one of my. She gets a shout out in my acknowledgement.
Oh my gosh.
Despite me not knowing her personally, her writing I think is like so exactly like everything that I hope to kind of be able to do, because she creates these things that feel so like digestible, but like smart and fun and kind of, I don't know, make you feel seen for the most ridiculous, crazy, spiraling parts of yourself. Yeah. She's just incredible. So I think if I had to pick like one writer, like it would be her. And then obviously
putting a link to Melissa Broder's books, because if y'all have not read them, pick any of them. It doesn't matter which one. You're going to get a feel for her writing. You're either going to love it or you might hate it, and that's okay, because she does that. She crosses that line. She goes right up to that thing and you go, is she gonna? And then she does, and you're either into it or not. But if you're into it, then you'll want to read all of her books.
And Death Valley just came out, and it's so good. Oh, and then also I think like sort of I'm really interested in like sort of hybrid prose, that sort of lyric or nonfiction and fiction and kind of all of those things. I think like obviously Anne Carson, her like lyricism and the mix of academia, like she is so like phenomenal. But then also like Margot Jefferson, and I think in this book like I do try to like blend I'm very interested in the way technology and gets sort of translated, and lots of people are doing it in many different ways, and who knows what there's so many different effects that they have. Like sometimes it's just to communicate sort of the information being translated, but sometimes it's to kind of create the magnetic feeling. And so I don't know, I always find Wayne Kostenbaum does that really well as well. I don't know, there's so many, endless people.
Well, the technology you're talking about too is always, I mean, it's like the more technology that exists in the real world, art has to figure out what to do with it. And that's like theater, movies, television, books. It's always like, sometimes you'll see a show or read books and I'm like, why did no one pull out a cell phone? Right? Like, what year is it? So it doesn't work if you pretend it doesn't exist, but you put it in modern times, you know, and it doesn't work to always set things just beyond when like cell phones existed. So it is figuring out how you use it in a way that makes sense to your characters and makes sense to your story, but also reads to the reader. Like, again, and I love that is an aspect of your book that I find like you do a good job playing with that a little bit, and like, how do you use that and what does it mean?
It's I mean, it's something that I was constantly thinking about. In an earlier version, before we got it copyrighted, there were like multiple like memes in the book, which I really wanted to keep in, but like it's such a bear figuring out how to copyright that because layers, you know what I mean? I don't know. I was like, this is too much, but there is a version of the book with memes in it, which I like eventually would love to publish something with that, because it's just I don't know, an influence. It is in our minds, you know.
It is, and then I guess if you're using memes that definitely exist, like that we've all seen and we all know, which is kind of what you want. Then yes, you run upon that. Like,
you can create new ones, of course.
Right, but then the burden is on you to create a meme that's going to remind somebody of a meme we all know.
Right. It's like amazing, which could be like such an incredible. It reminds me of the book. It's totally different, but reminds me of the book X.
Yes. I know the book you're talking about.
Which it was really cool. It's in this like different version of the world, but then she's sort of like writing this book about her deceased like wife, lover, and is creating all of these sort of like first-hand documents, like these primary I don't know. It's really, really interesting and good and textual. And like Susan Howe does a really great job with like actual text, obviously, of like, and obviously Anne Carson Knox. I don't know. Now I'm just thinking of people who do like real things with existing things, but yes, to create it and make it feel that sort of referential would be really interesting and cool.
Yeah, that's a whole almost project on itself, is just to write memes that like come up with 20 even, however many you wanted to put in the book that are like original memes, but that would be universal to everyone. I am so not good at this. So our social media manager, Jody, she at the bookstore, she is amazing at our social media, and she started this every Saturday. We do it pretty much every Saturday. It's like we dump like 10 memes. When I first started working there, everybody's like, oh, you can contribute to the memes. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. This sounds like so much fun. I'm going to contribute to the memes. I got nothing. I just stared there and I was like, how do I not understand how to do this? Like, I've seen them forever. I know how this works. I laugh at them. I get it. But to sit down to do it, and even on a theme, like,
no, I know. I've made like 2 in life, and they were like for a friend group chat. You know what I mean? They're not for the wide consumption. Very limited.
I made one that made the cut to our Instagram. I've only contributed like 4 or 5, so it's not, I don't feel bad. But like this one, oh my gosh, it was maybe a year ago, and it was. The other thing is so literary and so New Orleans literary. Like, it's about the Confederacy of Dunces. The book, it like won a Pulitzer, so people should know what it is. But it's a New Orleans book. So it was so like New Orleans bookseller niche, but it made the cut because I made everyone laugh that got it. But like
the Cafe to Meme page, I feel like also turns out there's a lot of like good New Orleans specific meme content.
There really is. There's a like, if you know sort of situation with New Orleans in a lot of ways. And we can churn out memes, but again, they're very niche, so we try to be a little bit broader reading audience. But I did not know I would be so bad at writing memes until someone was like,
it's really
go ahead and do it, and we'll put it on the internet. And I was like, got nothing.
I also feel like I come to a meme really late. It's really interesting because my partner, like, we have very different internets, kind of like our algorithm. But they're starting to, they're starting to merge a bit, but then in other ways they're still so distant. And so I'll be like, oh, did you see this? And he's like, yeah, I've seen that like 10 times for the past like 5 years. Or like, oh, new to me. So it's also interesting, like thinking about like with writing as well, like with characters, like how to kind of show, obviously through characterization and other things, you can like imply that, but it is interesting to me to like think of how to show like actually what someone is engaging with, because right now in our world, like you see it repeatedly, like the internet that you are on dictates so much of how you see the world. And I don't know, it's something that I definitely think about a lot.
It's true. And it's with incredibly important things and all the way down to like just silly memes that we're laughing at. And you're absolutely right. It's like finding your source, but there's no meme source, but like we're all pulling from all these different areas. And my husband and I have a similar situation, and he will tag me in things, and I'm behind him in the memes, which is crazy because it's a weird thing that you'd think would be the other way around. But he's tagging me in these like Instagram reels, and they're just funny, and they're like dogs chasing each other, whatever. And this is hilarious. And then I'll tag him in like one for every maybe 20 things he tags me in. And he's like, oh yeah. Like he's the other way around. He's like, oh yeah. Like, oh, I've seen that Boston Terrier one before. I'm like, that's how? This is the first time I saw it. And I thought, oh, that was adorable. But no, it's
I mean, with a dog, I mean, there's no limit on how many times you can see it. You know what I mean? Like
this is true.
You should still be.
He should just smile and nod. Like, yeah. Linda also asked when you knew you wanted to be a writer.
Yeah.
And you said since you were really young, but like
yeah, but what? Specifically?
Yeah, how really young?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think truly I became like very, it was always just something that I knew. I like the second I learned how to, so I told you the story of how, I'm so sorry, my like allergies were acting up. But the second I actually learned to read, I like wouldn't stop, to the point where I grew up in New York and I'd be on a subway and I would just read out loud every advertisement because I was like so excited about it. And part of it is I was acting, and so you needed to be able to read to audition for certain roles. So there's also a lot of pressure to, not like a ton of pressure, but like I put a lot of pressure on myself because I really wanted to be doing things. And so, yeah, so it was always something that I really like glamorized and idealized and wanted to be a part of. And I loved reading. I don't know. It was just like, I got very overwhelmed with sounds. I was a very quiet kid. Acting was always sort of a way that I broke out of my shell, but otherwise I loved stories, and I loved sort of, for me, acting and writing, I think both sort of served in different ways as a way for me to like safely become bigger and take up more space and explore ideas and other ways of being. And I think like acting specifically allowed me to like, like I cursed and I screamed and I did all of these things that like I would never do in real life. Like I remember being in middle school and being dared to say I'm stupid, or not I'm stupid, but just stupid, the word stupid. And because I just didn't do those things. And I remember, writing, about like sex and drugs and things far before I'd even gotten to the point where that would be a thought for me personally, not necessarily a thought, but like where I was truly considering it for myself personally. And I think it's just always been sort of a creative way to communicate and understand the world. I think I am someone who speaks in very spirally, circuitous kind of ways. Like I don't have sort of a linear arc to the way I think or talk. And so there's something about having the space to both explore that in a creative way, but also to like be able to edit it and understand what it is I'm really trying to get at, that I find really exciting and helpful. I don't know, like, I just think that there's so much that the form offers that I'm in love with. I've worked with a bunch of celebrities. The people that I get starstruck in front of are writers. Like, it's just, that is always, it's just always like author events were, my nighttime activity in high school. I have like a ridiculous number of like signed books and things that are like my prized possessions. It's just kind of always been a part of my identity. And
well, I love to hear that, because so often you hear that like people didn't even know an author event was a thing.
yeah.
And it's fair. Like growing up, I didn't really think of it. Like the only people who did author events were like, I don't know, Stephen King probably did author events, but you never really, like where I'm from a smaller town in Florida, and you didn't really, like, people probably weren't coming there, to be fair.
Yeah.
But still, it wasn't like, oh, we'll travel to this place to do, to see an author, even though I was a huge reader. So I would be into it, but it just wasn't, I didn't know it as a thing. And there's so many people don't even know. And so it's great to hear that like you were going to author events, you knew they existed, you're going and doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it was the best. It was amazing. I feel like it's just such a, I don't know, especially like being a kid in those spaces. Like I remember Neil Gaiman. If you're under 18 and you go to a Neil Gaiman event, he always like goes out of his way. If you go to the signing line, sometimes it's separate. But if you go to the signing line, he at least sometimes will have like physical objects. So I remember like one time he gave me like this little sloth that I still have. It's like this.
Neil Gaiman gave it to you.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
And I still have, but it's like, it's tiny. It could get lost very easily. But it's this tiny little sloth because I was like, I want to be a writer someday. And he was like, this is your enemy. Like, do not be the sloth. Like, don't go slowly, move quickly, and, whatever. But there are all of these like things that I think, especially when you're younger and you like go to those spaces, like people are so nurturing and kind and obviously give like the best book recommendations. And I don't know. It's just such a special place.
Well, yes. Well, I mean, I like books. So you were talking about how like acting and writing let you sort of get out these things that so I was the same kid. Like if I said it sucks, I was like, oh, like that was I just didn't do that. So I kept a journal from a very young age, and so similarly, like you could just write whatever. And I don't know, I think in a way it was a way to process it, because there are a lot of times it's not, I mean, if you're saying something sucks, it's a very, very low level of acting out, but it can be because you're just doing it just to see what happens when you do it out loud.
Totally.
And with writing, it kind of is a release like that. And I imagine acting, is similar in that you've now gotten this opportunity. They're like, you mean just scream as loud as I possibly can?
Yeah.
I get to just do that. And you're gonna like it. You're gonna be happy with me when I do it. And then so you get this opportunity to do these things that you don't do in your everyday life. So do you use that would you call it catharsis or inspiration, or both, I guess?
Yeah, I don't know. I think both. I think both, neither, like all of the, I don't know. I think like what both of them kind of force is sort of like a state of like true empathy, which is interesting. I think it also sort of like requires true like bodily presence. You have to be in the moment, and you have to be like, what is actually happening here? I think like the character work of acting like very much translates to writing, specifically for like, and for everything, but especially when you're in like a tighter first, it like very clearly translates. For acting, sometimes I'll like write diary entries or emails or, letters. I've written letters with another actor before, so there's like writing things that I do for acting work. And I think similarly, I don't do like necessarily acting exercises for writing, but I think that the process of figuring out what a character is and where they live is very similar. I do think with acting, it's more of like because you're embodying something, it sort of is, there's like a more of a personal closeness, physically, where with writing, I think it's more for me, like less of a bodily, like physical closeness to the story, and more of like a mental immersion, where you're kind of like swimming in the story, and then this pops up and you're like going for a walk or you're showering and you're like, oh my God, no, of course they're doing that. Or like, this is what she has to say. Why wasn't I thinking about that? And it's like, it feels almost like you're like living with another world in your head. as well. So I think it's like a sense of where the closeness lives physically a bit, even though the overlap is obviously, I think, very. I mean, writing, obviously, you have structure and you have to put the page on, like the words on a page, and you have to create an object that someone else can read and experience the whole thing, and it stands on its own. Where acting, you're only responsible for kind of physicalizing the journey for someone else to capture, or on a stage, or within a condensed period, a certain period of time. You're not responsible for directing the whole thing and making it come together. So they're very different tasks. Right. But I think sort of the acting background does kind of really prepare you for, or give you experience in going deep into sort of a character's backstory, which I love. And I think with both mediums, what's really cool is it sort of forces and allows you to kind of do deep dives into research and like go down rabbit holes and like, I don't know. It's like, it gives you permission to be a real like enthusiastic nerd about something you never thought you'd be interested in before.
Okay, so both from a writing standpoint, but more from a reading standpoint for me, I love any time I Google something and it's like real. Like I'm in, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, right? I'm reading and I'm like, did that happen? And then you Google it and you're like, wow, that part's real. Or like, this, the disease, right? Real, right? And you're like, shh, and I'm like, ooh, okay, now I'm on this track. Like over here, I'm learned something from a fiction book. Is like, it shows a lot. Like to me, I feel like I'm growing even more as a person, like not just getting this like empathy from the fiction, but I'm like learning some stuff, but also shows me that the author cared enough to make sure that these dots connected. This is, and it's, I wonder sometimes if it's even harder to do in the real world. Like if you're building a complete fantasy world, you are building it from the ground up, but you get to make all of the rules as long as they connect. But in a book set in the real world, at least the modern world, we have to, you want your story to do this. Well, how are we going to make, do these dots connect, and how are you going to make that happen?
And it's also interesting now because it's like, in this book especially, I like reference a lot of real things in a way that is like kind of more than I ever expected to do in fiction, because it definitely can like also date a book. And I think it's fun and I think it's necessary for this. But I also think that like, it's interesting. I don't know. It's interesting. I think it's as, not to bring everything back to the internet, but as sort of like the internet and like these sort of like posts, like it feels more and more kind of necessary sometimes to either completely like figure out how it fits into this world, or to like remove yourself and create more of a surreal, timeless existence, or like generalized time space.
Well, I will say that if the book is good, which yours is good. So if the book is good, it's timeless anyway, right? You drop those bits into it to ground it into a time, but it becomes timeless. It's good enough to transcend time, I suppose.
Totally. Yeah, it just becomes set in whatever time it is, but it transcends, of course.
So you've written like a short film, and you said that this started as a screenplay.
And now it exists as a screenplay as well, and hopefully I will exist as a film, but it just took writing a book to figure out how to make the movie.
Yes. Well, you got it. Like in a book. Okay. I was actually talking to another friend of mine who is a writer turned actor turned writer.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you're never quite not acting, writing. So she's doing that. She's working on a book right now. And we were talking about how she's like, I have to figure out how to tell you in a book something that in a movie would just be like a quick shot of a university sign with a woman walking out, with her briefcase, which is probably a teacher, like a professor at this university. You learn so much about this person in that one, like 5 seconds of film. And, but in the book, you can't do that. There's no equivalent to that. So was that easy? Was that hard?
Yeah, I think it was once the book was written, and it's such a, I mean, as I've said, it's such a close first person book that it's like I really needed to just understand what emotional beats were vital to the story. In its entirety, I needed to do like so much character development and work and see like each process of how the book existed. Like this needed to be the way it existed first, and then I think it was much easier to be able to be like, okay, now that I understand exactly where she's at, where Amber's at, the one of our two protagonists, I'll say. Then it became much clearer of like what was necessary, what do we need to see in order to still be with her on this wild journey for the entire time. And so I think that they're definitely different because we're not in her head as much. We're not getting her inner monologue, but we're getting a lot. And yeah, and I think it's easy. Yeah, I think that it's also I think it's a very cinematic book. Like it feels very big and yeah, I think it works very well in both mediums, but in different ways.
Yeah, there's some books turned movies that are similar where you're so deep in the main character's head that I always think like how are they gonna do that, right? Yeah. But then as a reader first, usually I have to like separate the two and then I come back. Yeah. Because if you enter in either way, if you watched a movie first and you're reading the book, or you read the book first and you're watching a movie, and you're like, well, this is different, this is different, this is different. Yeah. Well, of course it is, because these are two different like mediums. Totally. But how do they stand alone? And then are they like I want to see them as companion pieces instead of
an emotional. It's an emotional adaptation is kind of like how I view it. Even though this one is pretty strictly adopted. Yeah, it's interesting though which books tend to adapt really well. Like an example, I think of something that adapted really well is like Normal People, because it reads like, when you're reading it, it reads like a script.
It does. Yeah, it does have a lot. It just sort of like flows. You're watching it in your head.
Yeah, you're like almost projecting, like you're putting on, like you're adding things in your mind, which kind of like becomes the screen.
Exactly.
It's interesting.
I think I can get over, like, people always say, oh, the book was always better. The book is better. Okay. And I do, I did feel that way. And then as soon as I started thinking them as companion pieces to each other, I stopped, like that went away, because you're not comparing them in the same way anymore. You're like, okay, both of these are part of the world that we're now.
Yeah. Like there are some books, I don't know, like there's certain surreal books that, like an example of a book that I would love to see adapted is Temporary by Hilary Leichter, who
I have not read that, but I know the book.
It's one of my favorite books. I love it so much. It's a surreal take on the gig economy. And so she's like, it follows this girl who's a temp, and there's sort of like this refrain of the first ever temp who was a temp to the gods. And so it's like this, I don't know. But then she like gets all these crazy assignments. So she winds up like on a pirate ship, and she, like has to make someone walk the plank. And it's like all of these things. And it sort of is like what the gig economy will like force you to do. So it's really surreal and like scathing and beautiful and dreamy. And I'm like, I need to see, like, it's such a perfect book. It's amazing if it exists only on its own. But I'm like, also, we need like the Wes Anderson style movie of this, because it would be such a dreamy, beautiful, fun, smart movie.
Okay, I put the link to that because I want to read it. I knew it. I know the book, but I never read it. And it was like, okay, I'm in.
Yeah, it's really, really special.
Okay, so I have this link, and I'm going to share it with everyone so that they can watch it when we're done. Because this Virgin Territory is a short that you did, and then you prefaced before we went live that it was from high school. So everyone, this is so you can see the amazing work that Emily has done and the progression when you read the novel. But I think this is amazing. You're like, oh, I did this when I was in high school. I was like, okay, yeah, but you wrote it, you acted in it, you directed it,
Yeah.
It's a real live short, people. It is not a high school project. So here's the link. If y'all haven't seen it, you as soon as you're done, which you're going to wrap up in just a couple of minutes, go watch Virgin Territory, and then read the book if you haven't read Consumed.
Yes, please. It's pretty.
It's so pretty.
No.
Oh my God, I can't believe I don't have a copy. Okay, so our copies didn't show up in time, but for the interview, but show us the cover again, because I don't have a cover. Okay, so it is so great, and this is personally, I just in July I became a pussyfooter, which for those of you who aren't in New Orleans, as part of all of our Mardi Gras parades, there are a bunch of marching groups, and one of the marching groups that's been around for about 18 years now is a group of all women. They wear pink. Pink and orange are their colors. Yeah. And they dance and march through in the parades. So I just got into that group in July, and we booked this event. And when I got to see your cover, it was like it happened right around the same time.
So funny. I love that.
And I just thought that it was like, these are completely unrelated things. But also, I was like, oh, look. Spiritually. It's like this weird, yes, spiritually, this is a sign, and I love it. So
I love that. That makes me really happy.
So I love the book, and I'm also like going to put here in the comments that our number and our email address. So it took a little bit longer for it to get in our distributor, like available through our distributor. It is available through our distributor now, but the link hasn't shown up quite yet on our website. So if you give it another day, the link will show up, will be on our website already. But if you want one right now or just before it shows up, then send us an email, because we're closed already right now. But send us an email or call us tomorrow morning, and we will get you a copy, and we will mail it to you wherever you are, because it is amazing and you need to read it. Emily, I want to thank you so much for joining me for this event this evening. It's been so much fun talking to you.
No, thank you. This was such a pleasure. I'm so
and for being your first book event.
Yeah, my first one. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you to everybody who's watching. I see y'all out there, and we truly appreciate you, and everybody who made a comment and asked a little question. We appreciate that very much as well. So everybody, have a very good evening.
Yes, have a great one.
All right.
Thank you so much.